Hey, welcome to Dirk Island. This is the weekend show where we watch interesting documentaries and talk about them.
Okay, this is a fun one. A Whale of a Tale is the name of the documentary. It's actually a rebuttal to the documentary titled The Cove, which won the Oscar for Best Documentary in 2010. And if you remember, The Cove is a movie about a place in Japan, a little cove actually on the coastline, southern coastline, near a town called Taiji, where they would drive dolphins in using sound devices, drive them in from their migration paths into a little cove, then seal it off with nets, sell off a portion of the dolphins to animal trainers and things like a SeaWorld, but these other types of equivalent organizations around the world in different countries. And then for a large portion of the rest, just kill them with spears in this little contained area and sell them for cheaply for dolphin
Sell them
meat.
off as whale. Yeah. I mean, that white Western reporter who's featured in the documentary is just filled with so many fallacies. I mean, there's just the idea that we didn't consider this aspect of the story is ridiculous. And there's this impulse to which I feel he takes this defensive position. He's finding the victim, which is, he's, instead of taking seriously the point that the Cove is trying to make and that they're truly making a moral consideration, he views it through this lens of attacking a small culture who's vulnerable and can't defend themselves. He mentions these extremely media savvy interest groups. Mm-hmm. And the Japanese, they've got all the technology, but they're just not that savvy on Twitter. And so they can't defend themselves. And I think a lot of people view controversial topics through this lens, which is they don't necessarily have a stance either way, but whoever seems the most vicious with their point, they just automatically have a repellent towards that, and their instinct is to defend. I mean,
most helpless seeming.
Yes, the most helpless seeming, which is like, okay, so you're not actually taking seriously the content of what's being said. And he meets with this activist in Tokyo, and he says, what do you think about if Western people stopped making this criticism? He says one of the problems is people can't agree with the other side because they're so defensive and protective of their own culture that even if they did make a good point, they wouldn't want to, relinquish because they feel so attacked. And he asks, what if, this criticism from the outside stopped and this goes unchallenged? This woman in Japan, journalist, goes, well, I mean, I think if the criticism stopped coming from the West, people might even, forget to eat whales altogether.
Yeah, it's just like,
which is just like that. And I think his whole appeal is just taking the defensive position, defending whoever seems like the victim, regardless of the content of what's being discussed. Which is like, if that's your take on a controversial topic, like, just sit this one out. If you're not willing to engage with the ideas and the reality and the things that are morally relevant, like, that's not ethics. Just feeling compassion can actually, and this is an interesting topic, lead you astray when it comes to ethics. If you just let your emotional impulse on who you want to defend be the end-all be-all of what side you're going to take, you're going to end up on the wrong side a lot.
Yeah, because it's funny because what it is this moral heuristic that a lot of people put into, which is basically a moral, like an autopilot almost, where it's like, how do I decide this? Well, usually, and this is actually true, usually the side that seems the most big, bad, powerful, vicious is the side you shouldn't side with, and the side that seems the most helpless, kind of just more of a victim, is the side you should side with. And that's actually not a bad way to just generally look at morality. It's a lot of times right, but increasingly it's being manipulated because people realize that people do think about morality this way. They're not necessarily thinking about every issue, but they can think about it for 5 seconds, And using this heuristic, you can get the right answer, which maybe even before people realize this heuristic, you could get the right answer almost every time. But the problem is that a lot of people who are selling bad things are hacking people morally. They're hacking their moral heuristic, which is find the victim or play the victim. And I would, I'm going on about how the Dolphins are the victim here, and there are, and the other side's going, no, but you're not thinking about the people. They're the victim, and it's not really even the Dolphins. It's about the Sea Shepherd. It's about these environmental activists that are putting cameras in people's faces, trying to ruin livelihoods. They are able to do 400 tweets. You see how much engagement there is. This scene that I'm glad you brought up that is so ridiculous. I question why it was put in the documentary because it's such propaganda. But it's a scene with this journalist from the U.S. who's kind of on the side of the local townspeople, or at least he plays himself as like, I was convinced to be this way. And he's sitting there with the fisherman, and he's going, it's not, no one's hearing the other side. And one of the reasons is because the environmental activists are so good at putting out their story, but the fishermen, they don't even really know what Twitter or Facebook is, essentially. And he starts trying, it's a scene where he's basically trying to explain Twitter to the Facebook guy. And it's funny because it almost breaks. Explain Twitter and Facebook to the fisherman guy. And it's funny because the fisherman's like, oh, I didn't know, like, how can we do 200? We can't even, how can we compete with all these messages? And then they start watching this video that's posted to Facebook, which is basically the fishermen. They put up these like tent things so that they can't actually, no one can even from afar like see the actual people stabbing the dolphins in the cove when they're actually doing the killing. So they put up these like tent things, but it was like a video that was filmed through like a windy day where the tent flaps were like kind of exposing the murder. And the fisherman's reaction, instead of like, oh, we got to get our story out or whatever, was like, we gotta secure those tent flaps. You see, there's a problem there with the wind. I think we have to overlap them more and secure them so that they can't get the cameras through. And the journalists, like, trying to keep the scene on note about like how you guys just need to get your story out, is like, oh well, just to let you know, they're gonna find a way to do the cameras. Like, they're gonna, even if you fix the tent, like, trying to be like, I don't know. It was like so awkward because it's just like.
It's about you getting your voice out.
He's trying to, I'm giving you the scene to be the victim. If only people heard our side. We don't have to say what our side is. We don't have to say why we're right. We don't have to say why this is a good thing. But if only people heard our side, then it would be more of a fair debate, and this would kind of go away, and we'd be more of in harmony. And then the guy just starts going on. We need to fix that thing.
Secure the murder.
We can't have them filming us with making the whole ocean red from the blood. It's just like, it's just such a funny little moment there.
Yeah,
just revealing. So that was one good thing watching this, because you just see another moment of people just losing even when they're trying to just do straight propaganda.
And they do try to. It is propaganda in the way that they have this big debate, and the main guy from the Cove doesn't attend it because apparently they controlled what media could go in. And this is supposed to be a big debate between the advocates for the Dolphins versus the people of the town who are in support of the fishermen. And apparently all the questions were pre-approved, and the guy from the Cove is filmed not attending, and they don't explain why he doesn't attend, and the journalist himself who asks a question during this debate doesn't disclose that it had to be pre-approved by them before they would allow him into it.
Exactly.
And he's like, oh, it was a disappointing debate, but he doesn't even disclose that the question he asked in the documentary was pre-approved, which is like so weird. And it does come off as a total sham argument, and the people who they put up as in advocacy for the Dolphins make such weird points. And one guy even says, well, here the dolphin killing techniques are a little bit suspect, unlike in the West where the way we kill cows and pigs and chickens has complete ethical standards, which is like something no one says who's an animal advocate, is like, well, at least the way we kill cows and factory farming is ethical. It's like
Yeah.
it's almost as if he was like, who put this guy here? Like
Yeah.
it was almost like a plant. They just did not address the opposition in any fair way. And then but they tried to pretend like they did with the mercury poisoning section, almost acting, oh, we're going point by point through what the Cove went through. And the Japanese do a testing of the town and find that the people of Taiji are only 4 times as contaminated as the average Japanese person. By the way, the average Japanese person has so much more
It
mercury
has
in
a
their
high
blood.
fish diet. At
Yeah.
least it's not like so off the scale or anything, but it's a high fish diet. I mean,
And they have
obviously.
I mean, what 4 times if a chemical is relevant, I mean 4 times what the average Japanese person who eats a lot of fish already has, and they go, "Oh, but it's of no medical significance." And it's like it's really
But
weird. It's
there's a
like, so
scene.
is mercury not of any
Yeah.
medical significance? Why were we ever told? Why do we have this idea that it
It's
was
one of
ever an
those.
issue
Yeah.
that they have 4 times the average Japanese person and it's not relevant?
Hmm. Probably why
And
the average Japanese person has no interest in eating dolphin and whale meat.
I
'Cause
know.
it's
So
just
like I actually like eating my tuna sometimes.
Yeah, but I don't really need to go and do this because it's just it paints the society with such a broad brush as if Taiji is a representation of Japan as a whole, and it's I don't know. It's just that
Tries to do that a lot.
it's just weird. Yeah, it's weird. It's like, why are you doing this? You know, like we're not. You know, what audience is this going to? Someone who just is really. I can't imagine such a thing happening for the United States. You know, I would just picking out a single city in the United States and going, this is what America is. It's like, no, America's like so many things. You can't pick a single city or a single even small city with a unique culture of doing something that's really controversial and say that it's a representation of America. It's so I definitely do not would not want to be associated with it if you just picked a random city and said, "Oh, this thing you ascribe to that?" Oh yeah. Most likely I do not, but and I just it's like a slander of the whole country in a way.
Yeah, so slippery.
You know, this whole thing is set up as if we're trying to kill a small little society in Japan. And I think that a lot of people who would have a lot wrong with whaling or dolphin hunting in Japan would be Japanese people themselves. And if they're not Japanese people, a lot of people who love Japan and think so highly of Japan and all of the things that all of Japanese traditions, even some of the dark times, and just have even a respect for the country over the long run, and would like to be able to critique certain things and like to say that yeah, we shouldn't do things to highly intelligent creatures, whether they be dolphins or elephants or large cats or chimpanzees or whatever. And that should be completely reasonable, and people should. And yes, you're the 24 fishermen who seem to be making a living off of this. Maybe they're the last generation of this, but there were people who were doing circus performers too. Maybe that shouldn't be. There are people who are. This happens all the time, and realistically, I'm certainly not an advocate for getting rid of the history of all these things. I think the history of cruelty is a huge part of the human history, but we really need to it's so much sleight of hand, I almost feel like, is going on with this documentary. And I don't know if the director intended it or was lulled by the person who's maybe the main journalist, or maybe just befriended, or maybe just legitimately believes this way about it, or just wants to present both sides, because it's not as if it's completely one-sided. It almost tries to get you on this we're being objective thing. But so I don't think that from a pure documentary, it's like as bad as some others that are completely outrageous or telling falsehoods all over the place. But the tactics that are used are completely unconvincing and already known, as you said, by people who are opposing dolphin slaughter. And the people who are opposing it also understand full well that this is not the worst thing happening to animals or the environment on Earth, and yet are going to cave not 1 inch on thinking it should stop.
I thought that was frustrating to me, to you and I. It didn't present anything new, but the frustrating part about watching this documentary is it is propaganda-y, and I do fear that it could actually convince someone. And they present the argument, the counter argument they present in the film is just the weakest versions of the opposition. I mean, they show these Sea Shepherd people who are kind of the quintessential, like, zealous animal rights people who are annoying, not articulate, and they kind of give them lip service during the documentary. I mean, one girl's like, well, in the US, we don't eat whales and dolphins. And then they let someone say, like, oh, like, like, you slaughter your cows and chickens or your cows and pork. And it's like,
and you don't show it, so why
and you
should
don't
we
show
be?
yeah, why should we show all
Yeah.
sorts of weird equivalencies? And a third person says, well, it's not like we're eating kangaroo, and they're just trafficking in, oh yeah, well, I guess kangaroo is weird, so yeah, I mean, and it's weird that they eat dolphin, so like maybe everything moral is equivalent. And it's just like there's like a logic to it if you haven't been presented with this type of flawed thinking in the past. And I mean, yeah, if you're the type, some people think like this, which is like, oh, you can't have any moral standards.
Yeah,
you can't think dolphins are inherently worthy of moral consideration because it's just what you think versus what they think, which is what the central flaw of this movie is it's like, it's just what we think, the Cove people who support that movie and Western people and environmentalists, versus them and their culture. And it's just two different opinions that are equal sides to, let's teach both sides. It's like, no, not every issue is just drawn down the middle between two equally reasonable sides who see from a different perspective. It's like, or I don't want to see the world that way. And I think if your morals are based on that, it's just not a very strong foundation. I mean, at the end of the day, do you think that intelligent, sentient life is correlated with what should be given moral consideration? Or do you just think, I mean, the example of, like, what if we go deep dive into a culture of, like, child marriages? Something that's gone on for hundreds of years, that's based in people's religions, that would really offend and be difficult for a Westerner to go into a small culture and say, hey, what you're doing is wrong. And it rubs me the wrong way. It's not like I personally take any pleasure from the idea of, me or anyone else telling someone how to live. And the guy from the Cove even says that.
Or to not have multiple wives, or to, all these things that people are doing historically that still exist in parts of the world, that if you are going to have a morality that is robust enough to travel around the world and is not just based on what you come up with, you can be critical by learning things about the way that the U.S. is versus other countries around the world, which is a lot of what people do successfully criticize the United States specifically based on what maybe another country does. It's also a great way to criticize the United States, but if you have a morality that's robust enough, it shouldn't have one standard for women in one place and one standard for women in another, or one standard for animals in one place necessarily and one standard for animals in another. That is, at least in my opinion, not a real morality. That is a dereliction of duty if you want to pretend that you have morality.
Yeah, and not even, and I mean, I use child marriages as analogy, and I think for me, there is somewhat of a scale. Do I put the morality of how we treat any human the exact same as dolphins? No. But do I pay attention to what's the reality in the world and say that's what I thought was kind of offensive, is just glossing over dolphins as if they were just another foodstuff. Like that's also, like, I do think cows and chickens are also worthy of moral consideration, but the fact that dolphins are highly complex and able to suffer in ways that not all animals are capable of suffering based on what we know. It's like, you should take everything at face. You should take everything as it is. You should take in the relevant information. It's not useful to just categorize across the board. Like, there is a scale to it, but I think that's one of the things that's so egregious about it, is just it totally glosses over any specificity of, like, what your morals should be about treating dolphins. and just creates this relativism, which is like, if we go down your path, like, where does that take us?
Yeah, the debate.
How can
isn't
we
even,
say anything's right or
the
wrong?
debate isn't even about a person from Taiji's morals versus a person from Los Angeles's morals or whatever else. That's pretty much irrelevant to a real moral consideration. Just to think, even for 1 second, I mean, I know this happens with livestock in the United States, but just to think that perhaps, a pod of dolphins gets taken into a little cove in Japan one day. They don't have any idea this is going to happen, obviously. The way they drive them in is, terrifying them by ringing the water with these, beams, if you remember, to get them basically to run from the extremely loud noise that it reverberates through the water. And because they've got such sensitive hearing, it's just like they run from it into the cove to their eventual death. But to think, I mean, how many, if you're a pod of dolphins, they have obviously parent-child relationships, possibly brother-sister relationships, extended family relationships. They're very complex beings, and at that moment, they might be split. They might be split by the time some trainer decides to take one of them to an aquarium in Egypt versus the other one that is, for whatever reason, not chosen and gets slaughtered there. Or they might just both be in the slaughter, and one has to watch the other get stabbed to death. And you think, oh, well, we killed the one. It was painless. It's like, well, what about its fucking child that was right next to it, or the mother who watched the child get stabbed to death?
Mm-hmm.
These animals are not that dumb, and we don't even. I mean, that's the real morality here. And to the idea that this documentary is going is, the guy, the Western journalist says, a lot of people are worried about the threat to, what did he say?
That think that whales and are concerned about them being endangered. Whales and dolphins being endangered.
What I'm concerned about is local communities being endangered, and it's just like,
yeah, it's so frustrating how they completely gloss over the dolphins themselves.
Yeah.
In the documentary, they do not really address the concern and the attention paid to the fact that they're a uniquely smart group of animals.
Yeah,
which is one of the main parts of the cove.
Yeah, it's just the cove itself is so effective because it makes you fall in love with dolphins as a being. Almost like we have an animal on this earth that has an ability to make clicking sounds and communicate over miles in this incredibly complex thing that our technology of sonar is, trying to replicate through technology which they have basically evolved into naturally. It's an incredible species that has almost no issues on Earth, except for possibly getting corralled in on one of their migratory routes by someone who'd like to kill them. They're really and so it's just one of the beauties of the cove itself is making you fall in love with dolphins. If you didn't have a respect for them already, or you thought of them as just another fish, or whatever it might be. But the slipperiness of what someone who's the opponent, just a lot of straw men type arguments. The opponents are environmentalists, but I mean, in the scheme of all the things that are being done to the environment, why do so many people care about this little town? I mean, it's such a waste of resources. It's like, because murders are happening of a thing that people believe to be extremely highly cognitive, to the point that we don't really even know how complex their workings are. I mean, they're extremely capable animals, have evolved for a long time in the ocean, and have all sorts of things that we're always just discovering. And it would be, it just seems like a tragedy, I think, to a large group of people to murder them. And the one of the real tragedies is if they aren't sold off to servitude for all their tricks and things they can do. They are killed for meat, and it's like $40 to $110 per animal, as far as the meat value, which is like cheap. It's a cheap, stupid meat, which is another thing about this documentary that, it really is another point that there are these things that will be said that will play into your Western sensibility, at least your skepticism of your own Western ideals. So one of them is that there's this journalist who's featured, who's like kind of an American who goes over there, and he's almost one of the main people who's supposed to be like lulling you through it to come to the side of, oh, really these are some people, and we're trying to protect global cultures or protect local cultures from the impact of Westernism and globalism and all this kind of imperial moral. You don't know what we're like. You want to just destroy us and judge us and all this kind of stuff. And so he kind of lulls you through it, and he says, they eat dolphin in Taiji, and what in the West we call dolphin, they call whale here, and that really like got to me. I was like, well, that's a really designed phrase, almost like, oh, just realize that one thing is this way in this place, and one thing's another way in this place, and they think it ends. And I was like looking that up. I'm like, but what if that's a labeling thing? And the truth is that whale is like a delicacy, or has been at least a historical delicacy. Used to sell for a lot, and it's not dolphin meat. It's real whales, and there's an industry. There's been industries historically of whaling all around the world, and in some places, whale was a delicacy. Large whales hunted off the coast of Antarctica, but dolphin is more of not really a delicacy. But calling dolphin meat whale meat is a way to up the status of it. So there's been food scandals. There at least are some that you can research where they have dolphin meat that's labeled as whale meat, and one of the reasons is because people are more likely to buy whale meat, but they won't buy dolphin meat, which is also covered in the Cove and not at all addressed in this. And you're sitting there going, okay, why is this kind of slippery stuff happening purportedly from a journalist who shouldn't be telling us what they call dolphin, or what we call dolphin in the West, they call whale in Japan. And it's like there's two scenes later, where someone who's one of the whalers is eating various types of dolphin at a family dinner, and he's saying like, oh, that's pilot whale, oh, that's a common dolphin, or whatever. And you're like, what was the thing that I just heard 2 seconds ago? Okay, they clearly are not calling everything whale. It's such nonsense, and the fact that people who are doing this are missing that there's a whole mislabeling thing and a whole just there's so much more to this deception of what's going on, that it's a cheap meat. And I also think there's so many broad brushes. This is another broad brushing what the meat is and the value to society, because whale, it does have a long history, and dolphin doesn't have as long of a history, but they brush it all together. And the same thing with what do Japanese people think about it? Is it really a Japanese versus Western thing? It's hard to find studies about this, but most Japanese people do not eat dolphin or whale, and are not interested in this. And the idea that this is an attack, which is said many times, on Japanese culture or Japanese food culture specifically, is a complete slander of Japanese food culture, and a slander of what everyone else in the world thinks about Japanese food culture, which is that it is among, if not the greatest food culture on earth. And I think that you look at any place, you look at Los Angeles, Japanese food culture is so well respected in Los Angeles. If you just think about all of how many ramen places there are, sushi places, Japanese course menus, Japanese culture, Japanese Kobe beef, people think of Japanese things around food as like the highest level of everything. So to pretend like all of Japan has to own up for this thing that this little pretty rural community is doing and is going to be then slighted is, to me, it's such a why are you roping everyone into this? I'm sure most people would not actually agree with what you think to be your food thing. Yes, you can call it your local way of living, but it's like someone in the United States being like, yeah, we like to hit the pig on the head. That's just the way we like to kill them, and then trying to rope me into that. I'm like, no. I don't want to eat the pig that's been tortured by you, or whatever the fuck you want to do, and you're somewhere else in the United States. To call anyone who would criticize you, who's not an American, an attack on the United States, just don't rope me in with that. I found it just, that's another really slippery thing that they try to do there. They try to put these two things together, localism versus globalism, Japan versus the West, and it's like, you guys are a small community who do this thing that a lot of people don't like. I mean, it's like in Spain, they get rid of the bullfight in some areas of Spain. It's not
Mm-hmm.
a gone everywhere, but in some areas they get rid of these things that are like very well known. Like a tourist will get a shirt with a bull on it. Like they think, oh, bullfighting, they think the dancing, it's like such a thing. But like there's a lot of people who are like, I don't want anything to do with bullfighting. It's an embarrassment. I get that history exists. I get it's not like I want to delete the books or say we didn't have that or we didn't have gladiators in Rome if you're, Roman citizen or whatever. But you don't need to keep doing it. If it's clearly cruel and unnecessary, these dolphins, if they are sold for $100, they're not desirable. This is such a waste of an industry, and and to think so little of a dolphin, to even want this industry to continue. I mean, overall, I think one of the things that's funny about this is as a purpose in documentary. I think it might be surprising how so quickly we're so critical of something that seems to be so objective. I mean, watching it, you
Presents
might be,
itself as such.
yeah. So watching it, you might be like, this is just another side of the story, which in reality is a documentary style that I love. You didn't see, this is the new truth. You didn't see the other side of this. This is oftentimes the conventional narrative. Now we have the other side, but just like a vaccine works, it gives you a little bit of the disease so that basically you develop all the antibodies. I feel like this is a bit of how I am so. It's very difficult for me to be sucked into all these things because I've watched so many propaganda-y type documentaries before. You start developing a resistance. So if this is a difficult thing to recommend to anybody, because you could watch it and you might find yourself, depending on how much basically vaccination you have to propaganda, you might find yourself not questioning, not seeing the red flags that are coming up at you, and so it might be convincing. And I'm certainly willing to believe that not everything that was said in this is complete horseshit. And to be fair, also they cover the other side. It's just not very compelling. There's a lot of straw men type arguing. But anyway, I mean, yeah. So this is definitely a piece that I do not agree at all with the outcome of the documentary. But it is interesting to watch the counterpoint to the Cove, because if it had been convincing, it would have been incredible. Because I thought the Cove was incredible. I thought it was so incredible to win the Academy Award. We're gonna watch it and then do another thing on that one, because it really is just a piece of incredible movie making. But if a documentary had come and told me how that thing that got me, that made me so fascinated and was such a good piece of movie making, was wrong and didn't show the whole side, that would be one of the most interesting possible documentaries I could ever watch. I would love to know the new truth if it was available, but it is not. And that is just the unfortunate conclusion. Although I'm totally fine with the Cove being, just not even touched as far as its reputation. But yeah, this I would have loved to have learned something new and fascinating and groundbreaking and paradigm shifting, but it is not going to be found here. And it's not that it's a poorly made film at all, but it's a little bit slippery, and a warning to anyone who's watching it.
Yeah, I mean, I like how it is. If I'm honest, it's good to consider the other side. The reason that I am hating on this documentary so much is because it presumed that I watched The Cove without considering the other side or the cost of changing things, as if I just see it as the one-sided story. And I can see in a world someone could have watched The Cove, not had much context for it, not thought through the implications, and then they see this and they're like, oh yeah, there are real people who pay a cost here, and that would just blow their mind, and they would be convinced. And it's not to belittle the reality on the ground for the people in Taiji. Like, it is real, but it's just annoying or offensive or whatever, that the presumption that people who have a strong moral position didn't already think that through, that it was just unconsidered, to the fact that merely bringing up the other side is considered a counter argument.
Exactly.
That's what it is. It's that, oh, you probably came up with your opinion by merely considering one side only, and all we have to do is bring up the counterpoint, and that will finish it for you. That's what's so annoying. It's like, no, I thought of both sides and actually made a decision. The presumption of this movie is that the decision to advocate for dolphins was made in ignorance, was made with only one side of a story.
Of course, the other side could not be a worthy rival. They must be ignorant, because that's the only reason they would disagree with me. They must just not know. It's such a fallacy. We can,
heaven forbid, it's a complicated issue.
Yeah, we will talk about it many more times and other things, because I think it's more central to other documentaries too. But anyway, anything more to say on this?
No.
Okay, Whale of a Tale. Not in my top list. Thanks very much for watching us. Please subscribe on YouTube if you want to keep up and learn about more documentaries that we're watching. And also, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts if you want to listen to the audio version. Thanks very much.
Thanks.